Hmm. Okay. For some reason, my streaming is not working. Okay, let's try this. Hey, hello, everybody. Nice to see you here. And we are going to be doing our live Q&A. For those of you that are new or you haven't been here before, I usually do a live Q&A twice a month. And in your student dashboard, you'll see a module that says live events replays. And so in there, you'll find all of the replays. There's also a section where you can submit your questions in advance. And I do take a look at those before I hop on to make sure that I'm addressing questions from my students. And I will take moments of rest between the questions that I have on my roster here to make sure I'm addressing anything that may be coming up in the live space. So thank you to those of you that are joining me here live. And we will just see where the conversation takes us. So there are a few questions that were submitted in advance that we're going to be tackling here today. And I'm just going to pull up my notes. First question, why did my avoidant ex block me on social media after I told him we couldn't be friends, and what does that mean? How to catch up and reconnect with an anxious ex. What is a good routine to get yourself into an elevated state of consciousness and beyond attachment fears? So, definitely some good questions, and I'm glad we're taking a little bit of time to answer those today. So, I'm going to dive into the first one, and let's just restate the question to begin. So, oh wait, which one are we doing? Okay, avoidant partner. Okay. So, why did my avoidant ex block me after I set a boundary? So, this question comes from our online community, and there's a little more detail that I wanted to share with you. My avoidant ex reached out to apologize and said that he missed me, but he only wanted to be friends. I tried it for a week, but realized I wasn't healed enough, so I told him that I couldn't do it right now. He immediately blocked me on social media, and now I'm left feeling guilty. What does this reaction mean? So, first off, if you've ever been in a breakup where you still care about someone, but their behavior leaves you spinning with a feeling of confusion or doubt, you are not alone in that. Breakups, particularly with avoidant partners, can feel kind of bewildering sometimes. One minute they seem to want that connection, and then the next they are retreating again. And so when you set a boundary, like saying, I can't be friends right now, they may disappear completely. And sometimes with something as harsh as blocking you on social media. And so that can leave you wondering, like, did I do something wrong? Am I being too harsh? Why would they reach out only to pull back and block me again? So if you have ever had those conflicting emotions in this segment, I'm hoping that we will help you understand your ex's reaction as far as we can do that hypothetically. And also why this moment could be a turning point for you in your healing, right? So there's three things I really want to say about this. Number one, blocking is often about emotional regulation, not necessarily rejection altogether. Number two, your boundary is an act of strength and self-advocacy, not cruelty. And number three, guilt is a natural and normal part of a grief process, but that doesn't mean that you were wrong in establishing a boundary. Okay. So let's look at the first piece here. So when someone with an avoidant attachment style feels overwhelmed by their emotions and they don't really know how to handle it, then they will retreat. So for a lot of avoidant people whom I call rolling stones, blocking is a way to kind of shut the door to those feelings that just feel too big for them. So I might have you notice that it's sort of a mirror for what you're feeling, right? I can't do this because it's too hard for me. I'm having big feelings about this. So they're kind of saying the same thing, right? I can't do that. So it is a rejection on one level, but it's also what they need to do most likely to regulate their own emotions. Just like I can't be friends right now is what you need to do in order to regulate your own emotions. So your partner may have blocked you not because you're doing something wrong per se, but because seeing you online is a trigger for them. It stirs up feelings, longing, sadness, maybe even shame or beating themselves up that they can't be more of what you want because they have a story about what they are and are not capable of in love, right? Or maybe they like you to a certain degree, but it's not to the degree that you would like. And so you need to pull back, and now you're taking away a bit of what they do like, right? So it also just means that he doesn't have the ability or the tools to be in the type of relationship that, or be available or to see you on social media and be available to see you on social media and be able to handle what comes up for him internally when that happens. So you want to ask yourself, have you ever stepped back from someone or something, not because you didn't care about them, but because it's too painful or complicated to deal with it in the moment? And so you need to remove whatever exists in your environment that triggers you in that way, right? It's kind of like what you're doing too. So you're both on the same wavelength here. The important thing is to remember that that choice to block someone is really about coping. It's not about whether they see you as a lovable or worthy person. It's not about the validity of the boundary that you needed to establish around that situation. If anything, it's a confirmation that you made the right choice because it appears that this is someone who has extreme responses to things and probably isn't able to hold a boundary well enough to say, well, she can't be my friend right now, but let me give her a couple of months and maybe the sting will wear off and then we can change the nature of our relationship and it will be to everyone's benefit, right? It clearly doesn't have that capacity. The second thing, your boundary being an act of self-advocacy and strength, right? So when you recognize that being just friends is not in support of your healing, it takes courage to articulate that because a lot of people stay in those painful, half-hearted connections because they're hoping that it will become what they want it to be. And so they're kind of clinging to these breadcrumbs of contact. But in this case, our inquirer chose differently. They drew a line because they needed to honor their healing process and what that required. And boundaries often trigger strong reactions, especially if the relationship ended because there wasn't good boundaries going on, right? And boundaries are so essential because they really reveal the incompatibilities in a relationship. He wanted a friendship, you needed space, and then he couldn't give you time. He couldn't give you the space and time to figure that out. When it sounds like wanting a friendship instead of wanting a relationship was the space that he was asking for, right? So it can feel like a rejection on both sides, but his way of handling it, the discomfort, obviously, was to just reject you altogether. So the other part of the story in this scenario, like this, is usually that an avoidant partner all along the way has been kind of pulling back. And maybe the relationship ended because there were mixed signals or incomplete emotional communications going on for the duration of the relationship leading up to this. So breaking up and then wanting to reestablish a friendship, usually with avoidant partners, is a way of resetting the connection so that it never goes any deeper or past that point than what a friendship might afford, right? And so for the avoidant partner, that feels safer on some level. So they're wanting to be friends instead of lovers in their mind and makeup is a way of preserving the connection on a more non-threatening level. Now, for someone who is seeking a deeper intimacy and wants to evolve a relationship, however, that's going to feel like trying to cross the bridge and getting stuck halfway through, right? It's settling for crumbs when you want cake. So for the avoidant partner, it's likely that they've never really had cake, so they don't know what they're missing. And crumbs just feel like safe enough and good enough. And certainly better than risking getting a cake and then having it taken away. And because after that, crumbs would never satisfy and you'd be hungry for more, and that is a terrible feeling. But the reframe is that the boundary is not a rejection, it's a form of self-respect. So instead of asking yourself, was I too harsh? You might want to ask yourself, well, what kind of love am I choosing to create space for by honoring my process? Because that's what boundaries allow us to do. They clear the way for relationships that actually nourish us. And that leads me to my third point, which is that guilt is a part of a grief process. So let's talk about that. So guilt is common after setting a boundary, especially if we are used to managing other people's feelings, right? So you might find yourself thinking, well, if I had just agreed to the friendship, maybe he wouldn't have blocked me. But feeling a little bit of guilt here doesn't mean that you were wrong. It means that you're grieving the loss of what you wished that connection could have been. And maybe both of you are. But instead of saying, oh, I shouldn't feel guilty, I might invite you to see that as kind of a signal, a window into, okay, well, you cared very deeply and it mattered to you what their feelings felt like. And now your task is to look at, why do I feel guilty for setting a boundary for myself and advocating for what I want? What parts of myself have I projected into them that I now need to reclaim for myself? And what stories do I need to let go of? So if you feel guilty, it's likely parts of yourself have been projected into that person and into that story, their story. And so when you finally let go of that, this is where grief is allowed to surface, because hurting them feels like hurting yourself. So part of letting go of that guilt is embracing the grief process, which means acknowledging the loss of what could have been so that you can make room for what can now be, and reclaiming the parts of yourself that you think walked off with this person or that you think you cannot access without them. But they're your parts, so you most certainly can. So you want to ask yourself, what would it look like to allow myself to feel that grief without turning it into either a self-blame game or trying to rescue them from their feelings or trying to fix it or figure it out for them so that you can feel better? What about this process of reclaiming yourself, right? What part of this requires me to go through a grief process and then allowing yourself to grieve it? Because once you do that, you're going to actually make so much more room for what you really want in love. And this was actually how I came to talk about attachment. I wrote a book about grief. And so once you're able to finally allow yourself to grieve that, you will notice and experience a shift. So instead of spinning in this kind of guilt and self-doubt, you start to see the situation as a mirror. And it's showing you how far you have come and honoring your needs and pointing you towards the kind of relationship that you really want next. So let's start to bring this all together. So his blocking you is not proof that you are harsh or mean or should feel guilty. It's more that he couldn't really handle your boundary. And the choice to say, I can't really be friends right now, was an act of bravery and an act of self-advocacy, and you were not wrong for saying that. And the guilt that you may feel, it's just an indication of where there are spots you may need to reclaim parts of yourself from that relationship and allow yourself to go through a grief process, because that's going to make room for the things that you actually do want, that you discovered in the ending of this relationship. So even in a breakup, healing from a breakup with an avoidant partner, it's not about decoding their every action. It's really more about learning how to trust your own instincts. So I would say, if you take nothing else away from this video, just know that your value and your worth is not measured by somebody else's ability to stay connected to you. It is measured by your willingness to honor your own heart, even when that is difficult. Right? Okay. So I would love it if you'd let me know in the chat or in the comments here, have you ever experienced that where somebody blocked you on social media, or maybe you blocked them on social media, or there was this kind of back and forth where I want to be friends, I can't be friends, and then sort of a big reaction to that. I'd love to know what your experiences are. Okay. I'm going to pull up our next question here. Okay. How do I reconnect or catch up with an anxious ex? Okay. So I suspect that this is a question that a lot of people can relate to. Maybe you've been apart from someone that you care about, and you're wondering if there is a way back into that relationship or into connection with them in some way. But maybe this time your ex has an anxious attachment style. And that already sensitive territory starts to feel a little bit more delicate depending on how and why you are wanting to reconnect with them. Because anxious partners often live with this quiet but constant fear of abandonment or rejection. And so after a breakup, those fears are particularly raw. So if you're trying to reconnect, you're not just walking back into somebody's life, you're walking into their emotional history, their memories of their own pain and a longing for reassurance, and most likely some angry feelings of betrayal that they may be carrying if you left or broke up with them in a way that hurt them. So if you have ever, lay awake at night, you rehearsing the text you want to send or wondering if reaching out is going to bring some closure or healing or reconnection, or if it's just going to open up the wound again, then that's what we're going to kind of explore here in this segment. So I want to sort of offer you a framework for connecting with compassion, with honesty and clarity without slipping back into an old pattern or a cycle that's going to cause the pain and the breakup in the first place, right? So again, there's three things that I might offer you with this relevant to this question. So number one, you want to start with clarity and intention. What is your goal with reaching out? Secondly, you want to acknowledge the past, but don't over apologize. And it's about creating safety through genuine authenticity and honesty. And thirdly, we want to pace that reconnection and allow your actions to speak louder than promises. So first, let's talk about clarity of intention. So why are you reaching out? What is your goal here? Is it because you miss them and you want to explore a new chapter with them? Or is it because you feel lonely or you feel guilty? So anxious partners are especially sensitive to mixed signals. If you reach out in a vague or in a casual way, they might spend hours or even days spinning around what that could possibly mean and what you want. And that is just not fair to them. So instead of sidestepping the past, I think it's important to acknowledge it, especially with an anxious partner, because that past wound is probably pretty raw for them. And if you dismiss it, you're just going to make it bigger, right? So before reaching out, you want to get clear on what your goals are. Do you want to restart this relationship? Are you testing the waters for a friendship? Do you want some kind of closure? Whatever that is, you need to set the tone for that and be honest about it up front. So you might say something like, I've been reflecting and I realize I hurt you and I would like to reconnect, not to erase the past, but to understand if there's a way forward. Or I care about the bond we shared and I'd like to see if we could rebuild some form of connection, whether that is a friendship or maybe even something more. So the key here is really clarity. You have to be the brave one. You have to set the intention and the tone, and then allow them to accept or reject it. And yes, rejection hurts. Rejection might sting. But even if they push back at you at first, you could have planted the seed that grows a little bit later once they've had time to digest your words and maybe decide to give you a chance or not. The important thing is to stay consistent and to manage your own ego. Because if it hurts, too bad. You just want to accept that that's part of the process because the potential of reward, right, of rebuilding that trust is worth that risk. That's the decision you're making. And you want to be gentle, but direct. You want to open that door. Don't make promises you can't keep, right? But you just want to be clear. And these are the kinds of things that would help calm an anxious mind. Don't make it vague. Don't leave big, wide open gaps in your communication for them to try to figure out some deeper meaning. Be super clear, right? So be clear about your why. Secondly, don't ignore the past. When you acknowledge it, you create safety. So anxious exes will often replay old scars in their mind and in their hearts. They wonder, do you even remember how I felt when things ended? Do you even care about the pain that I felt? Right? Does that even bother you? I hear that all the time. So if you want to rebuild trust, you're not going to sweep that history under the rug. At the same time, it's important not to drown them in apologies or long explanations, and I'm going to explain why. Because when we over apologize, what we're really doing is we're buffering our own guilt. It's like saying, if I just beat myself up enough first, then you won't have the chance to reject me. I'll do it for you. But the problem with that is it takes up a lot of emotional space. It actually prevents your partner from being able to share their pain with you and give you the opportunity to apologize for it, to take accountability for it, and help them process it. When you over apologize, you take up so much space that it's impossible to connect with you. Okay. And so then they never get the chance to truly be seen, understood, or validated, which is what would reconnect you in an honest way. So real healing happens when you slow down, assume accountability for your part, and then let your partner be with their pain so that you can also be with them in their pain and maybe even your own pain that comes up in response, even if it's uncomfortable. Because that discomfort that you are now willing to share and be present with and be remorseful for, if appropriate, is the beginning of reestablishing that connection because it shows your partner that you're willing to witness and honor the impact of your actions and make a decision to do something differently. So accountability isn't just about saying I'm sorry 100 times. It's about making space for their experience and allowing yourself to feel genuine remorse while being steady. And that's what's going to begin to rebuild trust. So maybe you say something like, I know our breakup wasn't easy, and I take responsibility for the part I played in that, which was XYZ. I would love to understand more about what your experience was and if you're open to sharing. So you're not begging for forgiveness and you're not ignoring what happened, but you are creating space for their truth to matter to you. And that is really healing, especially for someone who's an open heart with anxious attachment, right? And the third thing is we want to be mindful of pacing, right? There's if there's one thing that we can rebuild, it is safety with an anxious partner. That is if you want to rebuild and reconnect with a partner, especially an anxious one, safety is first on the list. And how do you create safety? By being honest and consistent. Your words and your actions need to match up, and you need to go at a steady pace. Big declarations might feel romantic and sweeping and exciting and dramatic, but if you cannot follow through, that's only going to deepen the wounding. So do not rush it. Be intentional and clear with your communication and in your goals, as we said before. You also want to listen and respond and respect the boundaries that they establish because those boundaries are being established in order for them to see if you can meet them. So maybe that means there are shorter check-ins or lighter conversations before diving into heavy topics. Or maybe that means they want to get into a heavy conversation before they will even entertain the lighter stuff. So you want to show them through your actions, not just your words, that you are steady and reliable and you can handle that. You can do light and you can do heavy. You are here for it all. That's why you're reconnecting. So you want to ask yourself, am I showing up in ways that prove I am safe to reconnect with? Or am I unintentionally recreating the same patterns of inconsistency? Am I just lonely and seeking relief? So you want to avoid reconnecting over fantasies of the potential of the relationship or the projections of your own desires and needs, or connecting because you want to escape attachment anxiety and having them in close proximity feels familiar, feels like a relief. Instead, you want to connect from a place of having evaluated those patterns and noticed that I think there's real growth available here. And I'm genuinely curious about the other person's wants and needs. And I intend to make them a priority in my life because having them in my life is such a value add, right? Not a stopgap for a fear of being alone. So that's what I would say about this is that the pacing is really important. And it doesn't mean that you're going to drag things out forever. It just means that you're going to give enough breathing room and spaciousness for that trust to grow again through word and action. Okay. So clarity, acknowledgement, and consistent pacing. And when you've got these three things, usually what happens is you either rebuild a healthier bond with that person, and now it's grounded in safety instead of fear, and you get the clarity that this relationship either can grow and evolve or it wasn't meant to be revived. But now you've had the opportunity to gather some closure, to offer some peace to your partner if they had lingering questions and make space for the kind of relationship that you now know is more compatible with both of your needs and wants. And both of those outcomes are gifts. One grants you that reconnection, and the other grants you closure and the chance for a new and healthier connection. But either way, you're not left in limbo. So I would close this segment with this. Reaching out to an anxious ex is not about convincing them to come back. It's about showing up with accountability, curiosity, and care, being very clear about your goals, knowing that you're not reaching out from guilt or fear or seeking relief from anxiety or ego, but a genuine desire to rebuild something genuine, whether that means finding closure for what was or evolving it into something new, some new iteration, right? Okay. So let me know in the comments if you can relate to that. Who here has ever wanted to reconnect with someone and maybe they were a bit muddled about the reasons, or maybe you reconnected with someone and found that it really was about closure rather than trying to rekindle what once was. I would love to know that. Okay. What was our next question? Oh, this is a good one. Elevated consciousness. What's a good routine to reach an elevated state of consciousness and move beyond attachment fears? This is a fun question. Okay. So if you have struggled with attachment fears that maybe sound like a deep worry about rejection or abandonment or feeling like you're too much and not enough, that can feel very heavy in the mind and in the body. And it can keep us trapped in relationship patterns, overthinking messages and communications, replaying arguments, doubting our worth. And yet, deep down, there's also a kind of longing, not just for love, but a sort of peace, what I like to think of as an emotional freedom, for the kind of presence where your mind and your body can kind of just exhale, be present in the moment without feeling like you have to grasp for the outcome of everything, right? And be able to be present with what's going on within yourself and in the immediate circumstance while at the same time retaining some concept of the bigger picture, right? Your connection to things that are bigger than yourself, right? So I'm going to offer a couple of tips in this segment that you can play with. And you can, if you decide to implement some of these tips, I'd love for you to come back and comment and share under this video or the replay, because I'm going to share a little bit about how I work with this experientially with my students, especially in our Secure Spark Studio membership program, but also in any of my self-directed courses as well. So there's really three major things that I would recommend for this. The first is we want to adopt an attitude of self-acceptance and curiosity, not necessarily self-correction, right? So we want to make sure we're establishing that as the starting point for our practice. The second is you're likely going to want to dialogue with what I'm going to call your protector parts. You might think of this as an inner critic aspect, a harsh voice inside your mind, because we want to create enough safety so that even that harsh voice feels as if we are listening. And we're listening not with, oh, I hate that voice. It makes me feel so bad. We are listening with, ooh, that's a harsh voice. I wonder why it thinks it needs to be so hard on me. What is it worried about? And it's been around forever. It must be really burdened to be so critical. I wonder what that voice is struggling with, right? And then the third thing is we want to be able to install new habits of energy patterning, meaning new habits of thought, feeling, and behavior, and to embody them in a habitual way. I'll explain that in just a minute. So first, we want to come from that starting point of self-acceptance, not self-correction. And that means adopting an attitude of curiosity, right? Because if you approach your fears with the energy of, I'm broken, or I need to get rid of this, then you're reinforcing a belief that you're too much or you're not good enough. And now you're stuck in what I call double troubles. And that is feeling anxious about how anxious you are, and then beating yourself up for having a habit of beating yourself up. And that becomes this endless, inescapable cycle. So instead, we want to start with curiosity. And every day we're going to ask ourselves, what do I truly want? Is it love? Is it intimacy? Is it creative freedom? Is it peace? Anything that you want. And then you want to ask yourself, why do I believe I don't have it yet? And I have a lot of high performing professional clients and students who do well in many aspects of their lives. But when it comes to certain things, they still struggle and they don't think it's a worthiness issue, or they don't think that it's an esteem issue, or they don't think it stems from an attachment concern because they're so successful in all these other parts of their lives. And then you just have to ask them, well, why do you think you don't have it yet? And then we fall down that rabbit hole far enough, and we will wind up usually at one of those same core concerns. And if we can look at it from this perspective, now we're transforming your fear from a problem that we need to eliminate or fix into a messenger with something to teach you about yourself. And when you meet that fear with curiosity or that belief with curiosity, you are already in an elevated state because you're not fighting yourself, you are exploring yourself. And that's what elevated consciousness is. It's just a form of self-awareness. So fear is not the enemy. Instead, in this way, it's kind of a doorway to the growth that we're seeking. And our beliefs about why we don't have what we want yet, they're kind of like spotlights shining into what I like to call the dusty corners of our hearts that we have to sort of sweep out before we can make room for the massive flow of love and energy and abundances we are typically asking for, either consciously or even unconsciously. And so that leads us to the second piece, which I said was about dialoguing with your inner protectors or an inner critic, for example. So learning to dialogue with an inner protector alleviates anxiety and attachment fears. And why is that? Well, because those anxious thoughts or that tightness in your chest or that knot in your stomach, these are not random experiences. They are parts of you that formed to keep you safe for some reason. So I would have you imagine closing your eyes and locating where that, let's say, emotional energy and or the beliefs that are tied to it, maybe it's a belief about why you don't have what you want, locating where that belief lives literally in the landscape of your body, imagining that it has a home in your body and where does it live and what's the energy caught up in it, right? So maybe it is a pressure in your chest or it's a tightness in your throat. And as you connect with it, you're going to give it color, you're going to give it shape, you're going to give it form and texture. And then you're going to draw it. And you're not going to worry about whether it looks like anything or if it's messy, because that's not the point. We are getting that energy out of the body and onto the page. And guess what that allows you to do? Now you get to draw lines around it. And that's going to give you some clarity and control around it. And once it's on paper, now we can treat it as a living, breathing aspect of you because it is. And we can ask it questions. What's your name? When did you first show up in my life? What are you trying to protect me from? What would you need to feel safe enough to trust me? And with my students, sometimes I have them write these questions with their dominant hand and then try responding with their non-dominant hand because it gives them access to parts of themselves that they might not otherwise have access to. And it sounds kind of simple, but it's playful and it's fun, and it usually unlocks some pretty surprising insights. Because when we stop fighting our fears or our anxieties and we start listening to them, we start to relax a little bit because these are aspects of ourselves that finally feel seen, finally feel as if they're being celebrated for the hard work that they think they're doing on our behalf, on behalf of the whole of you, right? And as you start to express curiosity and you work with it in these experiential ways, you're moving beyond fear. You're moving beyond attachment anxiety. And not by ignoring it, but by changing your relationship to it because you're adopting a compassionate stance towards it, right? So that brings us to the third piece here, which is, you know, just because you've learned to recognize and formulate a new belief doesn't mean that you're instantly going to believe it. So once we've identified an old belief or story, it's not enough to just say, okay, now I've got these newfangled pretty words, affirmations, affirmative statements, whatever. Now I can just think differently. But your nervous system needs to feel it, not just hear it. So in our work, we practice formulating a new belief through storytelling because the unconscious mind loves metaphor and storytelling. And because I believe we are archetypal creatures. And so if the old belief is something like, I'm always abandoned, you might have a habit of looking out to your partners and your friends and other people to prove to you your lovableness by sticking around forever. But we have to acknowledge that other people have their own paths to follow. And sometimes it could be that staying with you would mean they'd have to abandon themselves, as much as you staying with them could mean an abandonment of yourself. And when you look out into the world and you demand that others prove to you your worth by staying with you no matter what, you give away your personal power and authority. And other people are imbued with the power to make you right or wrong, lovable or unlovable, worthy or unworthy. But they don't have that power really to begin with. So if you carry a story about I'm always abandoned, then it automatically reveals that you are in a perpetual state of self-abandonment. So the reframe then would be people come and go in my life as needed and according to my soul's highest purpose and curriculum in this lifetime. And I treasure the moments we share as it is aligned to share them. And I treasure the learning that is catalyzed even in their departure. I know I am never abandoned when I remain true to my own authenticity and connected to the divine spark that lives in my heart, mind, and soul. So you don't have to force yourself to believe that right away. Instead, we are modeling for our inner protector parts, our inner critic, what is possible. And we are expanding that protective part of us. We're expanding that vision by connecting to what is transcendent within us. This is what I call soul-centered security. Okay. And in my work, this is where expressive arts practices, somatic, body-based practices, things like guided visualizations and EFT tapping practices come in. And when we practice a new belief in a creative and embodied way, we are teaching our body, our brain, and our nervous system that safety and expansion coexist. And over time, the body will rewire itself, and this new belief starts to feel natural and just as habitual as the more constricting, negative, limiting beliefs felt. Because we are connecting more consciously to our creative life force energy, and that is a transcendent experience. So, for those of you that haven't joined us yet, if you want to know how to do this and to experience some hand holding and community support, I do invite you to check out the Secure Spark Studio. I'll leave a link to that in the caption and in the replay of this video. Every month, we follow a rhythm of this. We do a soulful inquiry, a guided practice, an arts experience, and a tapping practice so that we can start to shape and embody these new beliefs that we want to envision for our future, right? And we do this live on a weekly basis. So again, I'll leave a link to learn more about that in the replay of this video. And so altogether, just to wrap up this particular segment, when we are combining curiosity, right, self-acceptance instead of self-correction, dialogue, meaning we are changing our orientation and our relationship to the different parts of us, and we are speaking to these parts of us and we are celebrating them so that we can understand them rather than reject them outright. And then we start looking at what are the underlying beliefs that that energy has carried and how can we start to rescript that, in my case, through storytelling, and embody that in a new and creative way. That is when we stop the attachment fears from functioning as roadblocks and we start seeing them as little signposts to those dusty corners, to the areas where we're pinching ourselves off from being able to receive what it is that our heart and soul is requesting, consciously or unconsciously, right? And so, if you're interested again in learning more about how I do that, we'll leave a link attached to the replay of this video. Overall, curiosity opens the door. That dialogue with your inner protector invites in the healing, and then embodying our new beliefs anchors us into that elevated state that we've been longing for, that being ability to have elevated state of consciousness rising above our attachment fears, as our inquirer asked, right? So I'll just leave you with a question. Just ask yourself, am I willing to meet my fears with curiosity today? Because the willingness alone is already that first step into that elevated state of consciousness. Okay, am I willing to meet my fears with curiosity today? So I hope that was helpful. So I'm just going to take a moment to pause there and acknowledge our chat. Attempting as such, I found a lot of relief and closure, but then after a period of time, wanted more communication. Very good points you've made. Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing. Welcome. Okay. Yeah. So how is this landing with you? Any other questions or reflections coming up that you'd like to share for those of you that are here with me live? I have one question here. How can I stay with my partner during a tense moment instead of needing to leave to calm down? Okay. So, so that overwhelming feeling of emotion that you might have during an argument, you're feeling your heart pounding, your chest feels tight, and maybe it feels like every cell in your body is like, I need to get out of here. I need some space. I can't do this, right? We may feel like, oh, I wish I had a self-soothing strategy so I could be present with that. And maybe you haven't reached that point yet. And so you wind up saying, I need to step away and I'll come back. I want to just acknowledge that that alone is an incredible, strength and sign of emotional maturity, right? So maybe I just want to like affirm that saying I need to step away and come back is okay. Like that is okay. That is not the wrong way to do things. Okay. That's actually a tremendous capacity for someone to have that. So maybe I just want to start answering this question by saying, there's nothing wrong here. There's nothing wrong here. In fact, that's a great thing to do. Okay. But if you're asking the question, then maybe you have a goal or a desire that you want to acquire the skills to manage whatever's coming up for you internally so that you can weather the storm together without a temporary separation. So maybe that's a goal that you have for yourself. And of course, it's totally okay to have that goal too, right? But I just want to affirm that it's not right or wrong or better or worse. Okay. Like it's absolutely okay to say, I need a little while. I'm going to go cool off and come back. Okay. So just want to say that. There's the three things I would probably say about this. The first is that you can't really think yourself out of a flooded state, particularly when you are in the middle of it, right? So your nervous system is kind of the boss in that circumstance. And learning how to make it more flexible, like make it a more flexible boss, is usually a proactive thing. Okay. So that's the second point, which is that what you're asking about is co-regulation, meaning that together, two people in the room are experiencing big energy, and they're going to figure out how together they will modulate that big energy using both of their nervous systems in a kind of symbiotic state, so to speak, right? That is possible, and a lot of people like that. Um, but it's a muscle that you have to strengthen before you try using it, right? Thirdly, we want to make sure the goal is fluidity and not enmeshment, so to speak. So it is important to know when sticking it out would be of the benefit to the relationship and to both parties, and when stepping away would actually still be the best thing for you to do, right? Um, so first, the nervous system is your boss, right? So when conflict or tension rises up, your body can experience that as a threat, and that throws us into like that fight or flight sympathetic nervous system activation. And your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that is responsible for executive functioning and rational thought, empathy, complex communication, it just goes offline. It's like a circuit breaker gets blown, right? And it trips to protect the system. And so that's why in the heat of the moment, we really can't always think ourselves into staying present. You can't, reason with a surge of cortisol and adrenaline. So in those moments, your body has one job, and that is to survive. And for a lot of us, the survival strategy is flight. So needing space, it's not like, oh, he's being avoidant again or she's being avoidant again. It's your body's brilliant and ancient wisdom trying to protect you, right? But if you want to change your strategy from fleeing to staying, then we have to work with the body proactively and not against it. You want to start to speak your body's language. Okay. So, what does the body understand? It understands sensation, breath, touch, sound, right? So, we move from auto regulation or self regulation, meaning everything's going on inside of here. And if you're someone who feels like I need to do this first, then you will leave the room and you'll breathe alone and you'll try taking 3 deep breaths and regulate yourself. Kind of starts there. Then the next time it comes up, instead of leaving the room to do that, you ask your partner, I really want to be present with this. And you're going to practice it first. I really want to stay present with this, but there's a big feeling coming up. Can you just hold my hand and breathe with me for a second? Can we take a beat? Now, It depends, obviously, on your experience, but it can take a long time to get there, and that's okay. If you're not there yet, I have to leave the room for a few minutes to cool down before I can hold your hand, before I can breathe with you. Again, that's not wrong. But over time, as you start practicing this, you won't have to leave so often because you will feel like we're safe, we're together, we can handle this. An argument doesn't mean the end of the relationship. It actually means we're getting to know each other better, right? And so this is where practicing more positive beliefs proactively and with repetition in a combination with accessing the sensations of your body and working with your nervous system in a proactive way trains your system into a new habitual way of doing things. You can, your system was trained into what it's doing now. You can train it into something else, right? It's the beauty of the malleability and plasticity of the brain and body. And of course, you wouldn't expect to run a marathon if you hadn't trained for it. So you cannot expect to stay present and connected during your most triggered moments if you haven't practiced staying connected during your calmest moments. So if the only time you touch your partner is during a fight, when you're trying to hold their hand, that touch is loaded with anxiety and distrust. But if you sit back to back while you're reading a book at night before you go to bed, or you're holding their hand when you go for a walk after dinner, or every day you say, we're going to have a 60-second hug, or you are building a library of positive, calming physical connections with each other, then you are proactively training your nervous system to perceive your partner's touch as a safety cue, not as a threat, right? So you're building literally, not metaphorically, a muscle memory. And the more you practice gentle nonverbal connection when things are easy, the more you will be likely to use that tool when things are tough. So we're working on making the co-regulatory impulse more of a default setting, not an emergency protocol, right? And the third thing, as I said before, the goal is fluidity, not necessarily enmeshment. So what do I mean by that? So the goal of this work is not that you will never need space again. That is a dangerous myth. We want to develop fluidity, and that is the discernment to know when staying present, leaning in, weathering the storm together, attempting co-regulation is in service of the connection, and when stepping away is in service of the connection, ultimately in service of the love, in service of your relationship, and in service of yourself. So there is a world of difference between fleeing in a panic, right, and leaving as a conscious choice, right? Leaving with love and with the intention to reconnect. Because one comes from that dysregulation and fear, and the other comes from a more regulated and conscious choice. And how do we tell the difference? Well, it comes down to our communication. So, a panicked kind of fleeing might look like storming out, stonewalling, shutting down, um, refusing to make eye contact, rejecting their bid for connection, even though you're fighting. The energy is really more one of punishment or contempt or rejection or criticism. And the unspoken message is, well, you've hurt me and I'm going to hurt you right back. Or maybe you're hurt and I'm going to let you feel it, right? I'm leaving you alone with it. But when we leave with love, it sounds more like, I love you and I want to hear you. But right now, I've been hijacked by my own system, and I'm not going to be able to show up the way that I want to. I am leaving to protect this connection. I'm going to walk around the block, calm my body down so that when I come back, I'm not going to say something I don't mean. And I'm going to show up for you in the way that I need to in order to repair this. So it is a form of temporary, let's call it self-preservation for the sake of the relationship's well-being, right? And the unspoken message is, I'm overwhelmed, but this is not over. And I'm going to care for us by caring for myself right now. So the other one is a punitive abandonment, what I call a punitive withdrawal. The other promises a return and is in service of a repair. So staying present is a beautiful tool, but so is knowing your limits and honoring them with clarity and compassion. Both are useful and correct skills that you want to implement in a secure and mature relationship. So, to the student who asked this beautiful question, and to anyone else who has a similar question or feels that kind of tension, I just would have you be gentle with yourself and realize it's not about getting it perfect, right? It's about just taking a breath, being physically connected outside of triggered moments, building up that muscle so that if in those moments you want to have a deeper connection, you have what's there to make it happen when you're in a triggered moment. Okay. So I hope that that's helpful. Thank you everyone for joining me here today. Um, and I'm just going to acknowledge our chat here for a second. I don't know anymore what I have to text her. I'm scared to text something, so I disappear and there's no communication for 8 days. I'm anxious and she's avoidant. I'd recommend checking out my communication course, the Courageous Communicator. And there's a lot more information about communication there and give you some insights into that. We'll leave a link to that in the caption of the replay. Okay. All right. So with that, I'm going to end our call now. Thank you everyone for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.